And welcome, chat, to this 46th episode of American Spirits. For the last half dozen episodes or so, we have been traipsing through the American Southwest, building up towards one climactic event. And today we are approaching the threshold of that very event, the Mexican American War. And to help us with that is our Southwest expert, Mr. Thomas Wayne Riley. How you doing, Thomas?
Very good. Thank you for having me on.
And once again, we have the inestimable George Bagby to guide us through the trials and tribulations that now face the Polk administration. How you doing, George?
I'm doing wonderful. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Excellent. So where do we start?
I think last time we were wrapping up with Fremont in California and the funny goings on there with the Pathfinder, John C. Fremont, and his adventures with the Bear Flag Revolt, so called. But I left us off, I think, with the situation in regards with Texas and Mexico. So Texas is in the process of getting annexed, and yet the Mexicans have no comity with Texas. There are no settled borders. Polk had sent John Slidell to negotiate something with Texas, and he had a very large purse to try to negotiate some agreement. And yet, John Slidell was not seen by the Mexican president. He was sent away ignominiously and offensively.
Hmm.
In March of 45, there is a total break in relations between Mexico and the United States. And the reason for this is goings on in Texas. As yet, no one knew what was going on in California with Fremont. He's just too far away, and there are no lines of communication for the situation in California. So Slidell's response to his very rude dismissal in Mexico City, he said, "Be assured that nothing is to be done with these people until they have been chastised."
Hmm.
So it's a token of American sentiment at this juncture that the Mexicans are being intractable, being extremely proud of their situation, convinced that they must show the Americans a thing or two to vindicate their national honor and the rest. The Mexican position here is quite interesting. Let me find my passage here. So this is the way Ray Allen Billington has the Mexican attitude. The Mexicans desired war. There was not a red-blooded man among them, but felt the national honor could be redeemed and the nation saved from future aggression only by challenging America at once. The real and effective cause of this war, one wrote shortly after it began, was the spirit of aggrandizement of the United States of the North, availing itself of its power to conquer us. So the Mexicans were liberal idealists at this stage. They imagined that with their larger army and with their liberal policy in which they had enfranchised the serfs and slaves of Mexico, that they could attract the slaves of the Deep South to join their banner and even make inroads into the southeast of the United States in this war. The Mexicans outnumbered the American standing army 5 times the size. So they had some reasons on paper to take confidence, but in fact, they were woefully unprepared.
No, the very imagining of the logistics involved with a push from Mexico City into the American Southeast, especially with 19th century technology and 19th century infrastructure boggles the mind. I think it was Grant who famously said that all the armies of Europe could not together take a drink from the Ohio River, but to imagine the Mexicans doing it over the desert and the mountains and the swamps and the Mississippi, it's quite an ambition.
And the Mexicans didn't have 19th century technology. I mean, maybe very, very early, but they were far behind.
And corruption had really sabotaged all of their preparations. The political state in Mexico, with the rapid turnovers in regimes and the infiltration of all these bad actors into the Mexican administration, it meant that their military industrial complex, such as it was terribly prepared for this. We'll be getting into that, like the terrible quality of the Mexican outfit.
Well, you even told us 2 or 3 episodes ago of how Mexican rifles would fire their shots at such low velocity that they just bounce off the Texans. Or maybe it was Mr. Riley who told me that.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed.
Slidell met with Herrera. Paredes kicked out Herrera after getting all that money to go reconquer, well, not reconquer, but go defend California. Paredes took over from Herrera. So Slidell went to go meet with Paredes as well. And Paredes was so anti-American. And I read in one source, I think it might have been Eisenhower, I don't remember, that Paredes was pro-Bourbon monarchy. He wanted to rejoin the Bourbon monarchy, but that didn't happen. And instead, of course, yeah, St. Anna. We'll probably talk about St. Anna coming back, but yeah. About political instability.
Yeah, the political instability of Mexico was its death knell. It sealed its fate for the Mexican War. Had they been more creditable, they would have been able to finance their own operations in Mexico. They would have been able to develop their own infrastructure. They would have become more economically independent. They had sabotaged their own credit rating by disavowing all sorts of debts with Europe. And then the frequency of the turnover of the regimes and the way that they went about that, disavowing everything previous regimes had done, it meant that they were not a creditable actor to make deals with, to settle territorial claims with, and so on, to pay any sort of indemnity to even. They were not creditable for any of these. And the fact that the Mexicans had gone in for a popular administration, a Republican administration, it meant that the unrealistic ideals of the Mexican populace to reconquer Texas it made it a third rail in Mexican politics. Even those that knew better Mexico's capabilities could not risk making the deal or risk themselves being overthrown in a revolution. So the last American ambassador to Mexico was Waddy Thompson, who leaves in early 45, and he's collaborating with Slidell on Slidell's mission. Waddy Thompson writes to Washington that Mexico claims to have 20,000 men in their national army. Well, they claim to have 40,000 men. They actually only have 20,000 effectives, he says. He says that a full half of their army is so ill-equipped and poorly trained and have such low morale that they might as well only have 20,000. He says that their soldiers are mere apologies for soldiers or even men. So he describes the Mexican situation, and this isn't grounds for aggression, as we will see. Polk is hesitant to provoke Mexico on any grounds, but the Mexicans are certainly overconfident and belligerent in this circumstance. So I think that we got up to annexation last time. Mexico broke off relations with the United States in March of 45. Texas was admitted to the Union as a state at long last, December of 45. So the last president of Texas, Anson Jones, presides over the transfer of power and lowers the Texas flag at Austin, and Mexico becomes a state.
And when that happens, he says, "The Lone Star of Texas has passed on and become fixed in that glorious constellation of the American Union."
Very fitting, another star on the American flag. And Texas, quite a prominent one. This is what comes to our minds when we're talking about this period. The great expansion that takes place under President Polk. What sort of country would we have without Texas and California?
Mm.
You know, America is unimaginable in modern times without those key elements in the modern union. Texas and California are just inestimable jewels in the modern union. Whatever detracting opinions we might have about either one, they
Well,
are
what you say
incredibly powerful.
is true on so many dimensions. There's the physical dimension, two vastly rich lands with tremendous natural resources and tremendous beauty, but also on the cultural dimension. I mean, when foreigners think of an American, what picture forms in their head is so often a Texan, a man in a cowboy hat with a six-shooter at his hip, and in another dimension, when a foreigner thinks of American, they often think of a Californian from the movies, from, a movie star, a glamorous guy. It's such a heavy component of the American mix. It is inconceivable that we would think of modern day America without those two components.
Absolutely. They're just vital elements of our conception of the United States today. So Ray Allen Billington, who is my major source on these matters, he says there are those that decry President Polk in modern times as a belligerent sort of fellow. And Billington says nothing could be further from Polk's character. He was an unassuming, serious sort of guy. He's very vocal in his belligerence towards the British Empire, like his mentor Andrew Jackson. And he's threatening war about the boundary in the Pacific Northwest, but he's actually very careful about the Texas question. So he sends off Slidell. That is the best token of his goodwill that we have in our evidence here. But Billington says Polk never dreamed of any other war than upon the Whig Party. It was his own domestic political opponents that were his major antagonists. He sends Zachary Taylor of the United States Army down to Corpus Christi in July of 45. This is after the break in relations and during the negotiations to admit Texas. He sends him to Corpus Christi with 1,500 men. It's important to note this is outside of that contested region of the borders of Texas down on the Rio Grande. So he sends him there to avoid provoking Mexico unnecessarily. In January of 46, with the total break in relations continuing, with Mexico rejecting all negotiations regarding Texas, Polk is more aggressive. He sends Taylor down to the Rio Grande. The audacious claim of the Republic of Texas for their territorial extent. There are virtually no infrastructure down there and virtually no Texans down in the area. It's just too exposed and too desolate for dense settlement of any sort. So Taylor goes down to the Rio Grande with specific instructions that he is not to assume any hostilities with Mexico until a declaration of war is made, and that he is to assume a strictly defensive posture on the Rio Grande and monitor what's going on with the Mexican army opposite the Rio Grande. He is reinforced with 4,000 men. Now, in April of 46, so several months later, General Mariano Arista of Mexico, of the Army of the North, arrives opposite the Rio Grande with 5,000 men. He sends his cavalry upriver about 50 miles, where they cross over into the claimed territory of the state of Texas. Taylor sends American mounted troops to scout and see what the Mexicans are up to. They observe them sending out these mounted troops. This is a couple days ride away. 60 miles is a long ways when you're on horseback. They go up there and they discover the Mexicans have crossed the Rio Grande. They surround the Mexican dragoons and demand their surrender. A skirmish erupts, which results in the death of Lieutenant Brown of the United States Army. He is the first casualty of the Mexican War and the namesake of Brownsville, Texas. So
it's
go ahead.
So I'm doing a series on the Mexican War. Brown died during the siege of Fort Texas, which became Fort Brown, which became Brownsville.
Did I get that wrong? Thank you.
It was a Captain Hardy, or no, it was Captain Seth Thornton, who went up to this plantation ranchero on the Rio Grande because there was news of the Mexicans coming over. He was with 62 dragoons. They went up there, and Thornton, he gets court-martialed for this, but he goes into this ranchero, and it is completely surrounded by chaparral, like a 6-foot wall of chaparral or 4-foot wall of chaparral, with one side of the ranchero being the Rio Grande. And it's a massive property with a natural fence around it. And he just waltzes in there to go interrogate this old rancher. It doesn't post sentries. They've been riding all night. They're dragoons, so they've been riding all night, no sleep. He gets there. He's talking to the old man, and the Mexicans entered through. There's only one entryway, one little gate. They enter through it. They completely surround the Americans. They start shooting. The Americans shoot back, and then the Americans are overwhelmed, so they start dispersing. Some try to go to the Rio Grande. It was too muddy and at that time swollen, so they couldn't cross into Mexico. They tried to go into the chaparral, but it was too thick, the wall, this natural wall. And so a whole bunch of them get killed. The number, I don't remember. I can look it up real quick here on my notes. But then they surrender and they get taken prisoner and they get sent back to Matamoros. And then that is when Taylor sends Polk. Hostilities have now been considered commenced. But Brown does die. He just dies. I think he's one of the only casualties on the bombardment of Fort Texas, which becomes Fort Brown during the battles of Reseca de la Palma and Palos Altos.
I see. I got him mixed up. He's nevertheless one of the first casualties in action. So Zachary Taylor sends a message post haste to Washington. This arrives a couple days later. So May 9th, the message arrives about the Mexicans crossing the Rio Grande and hostilities commencing with the cavalry. On May 10th, the president goes to Congress to request a declaration of war. It is very enthusiastically supported. The American Congress is very eager to respond to this provocation, the move across the Rio Grande into Texas territory as they understand it. The declaration of war is made. The president sends out quotas to the states based on their population of however many regiments they're expected to send to support the war effort. So famously, Tennessee gathers its volunteers, its quota, in 1 week. They beat all the other states for this. The response in Tennessee is so enthusiastic, the state government organizes a lottery for the slots in the state volunteer militias. They only have 30,000 spots for their quota, so they're asked to raise 3 regiments. They have 30,000 volunteers that first week. They have 10 times the number of people applying, and so they decide to make it a lottery, and they fulfill it in the first week. Kentucky comes in.
And the men that don't get
right
picked,
behind.
they move to other states to go join. They move to neighboring states to join the men that don't win the lottery and don't get picked.
Kentucky sends their contingent after only 10 days. So they're just behind Tennessee. And Illinois, asked to raise 4 regiments, raised 14 regiments and sent them off to the front.
Our most valiant state.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I included that one in there just for you, Mr. Quinn.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you.
So the response, especially in the South and in the West, is very enthusiastic. It is much more subdued in places like New England. So while everyone is clamoring to join a volunteer regiment, there is no such clamor in Massachusetts or New York City, for that matter. They simply aren't so invested.
So I'm pretty deep into my series right now on the Mexican War, and the only regiments from the North are Illinois, Ohio, and New York State that I've read about so far. The rest are all from the South.
Billington has some interesting figures on that. Let me see if I can find them here real quick. Interestingly, this is an aside. Abraham Lincoln is one of the only members of Congress who is opposing the Mexican War vocally, and he is voted out of his office shortly after, after the end of his term. His famous claim is, "Show me on the map where the Mexicans attacked us." And of course, his argument is, this is disputed territory. Who says that is Texas? Right. So it's
the Nueces Strip.
Yes, indeed. It's a disputed area, and so it makes some sense. But he is outspoken, curiously, that no American soldier should be sent to his death over such a disputable matter. So here is Billington. So
one wonders how he imagines such disputes get solved.
Indeed, yes. Billington says, in the Southwest, 1 in every 33 persons subscribed to volunteer. In the Northwest, 1 in every 110 enlisted. In the Mid-Atlantic, the numbers fell off to 1 in every 1,000 persons, and in New England to 1 in every 2,500 persons. So that gives you a bit of the scope about the popularity of the outbreak of hostilities. So quickly after the action on the Rio Grande with the cavalry, the Mexicans do cross over the Rio Grande. Let's see.
I believe it was north of Matamoros in Fort Texas, soon to be Fort Brown.
Yes, on May 7th. So this is immediately after that first action, and even before Washington has received any official word about it. The Mexicans move up to Palo Alto, which is on the Texas side of the border. Their goal is to cut Taylor off from his sea supply. So there are very long and dusty roads headed up towards San Antonio and Corpus Christi. Taylor is relying
Port Isabel.
Port Isabel is his port down there.
And he was already there when was it Empadilla? No, Arista crossed over. Arista's trying to cut him off from Fort Texas while he's at Port Isabel to bring a couple ships showed up to bring supplies to Fort Texas to start the war, essentially.
Indeed. So Taylor is concerned that this Mexican maneuver is going to cut him off from his base of supply, and so he moves aggressively. The Battle of Palo Alto, it is mostly an artillery duel. So the Americans and Mexicans skirmish, then they start bombarding one another with their artillery. They don't have particularly much artillery. Both sides have about 10 pieces. So this is not a very large artillery duel by any standard. But the Mexicans have particularly bad gunpowder, and this is a result of corruption in the Mexican military supply. Whoever is making gunpowder for the Mexican army is taking a major cut of profit out of the quality of the gunpowder. The Mexicans fire artillery barrages, and the cannonballs are moving so slowly, the Americans can actually maneuver out of the way. So it causes virtually no damage on the American side, and the Americans are using fair quality gunpowder. They blast the Mexicans away.
So there's two things I'd like to interject real quick. That is absolutely correct. They literally could watch them roll through the chaparral and moved out of the way. And the Americans had something called the flying artillery. It was very light artillery that they could put on the back of 4 to 6 horses and maneuver very quickly, as opposed to the Mexicans using oxen to carry their giant cannons with terrible powder and terrible aim. So the Americans could move this flying. This was a brand new, actually, I forget the name of the man, the American. He would die in this battle, actually. But the man who invented, or maybe he died in Monterey, I don't remember. But the man who invented the flying artillery, like it was an innovation of its time. You just put a light cannon on the back of 6 horses and you can gallop them wherever, quickly unlimber it, and then fire grape shot. And it tore through the Mexicans. And this was an absolute artillery battle. You were right. But I want to quote someone who I've come to admire a little bit, a tiny bit, Sam Grant or Ulysses S. Grant. So the Mexicans fired like 3 volleys of cannons before finally they got it right. And they fired way too soon. So they were trying to intimidate the Americans, but the Americans were very disciplined. These are not volunteers yet. These are regular army men right now. We mentioned all of the volunteers in Tennessee and Kentucky, and they will all come down to General Taylor, but they will miss these battles. And so this is all regular army right now. And so they are marching towards these firing cannons, and the Mexicans are firing their balls. They're not making it to them. And Sam Grant wrote, I said, he described the awful scene once the shells found their mark. He wrote that one cannonball, quote, struck the ranks a little ways in front of me and knocked one man's head off, knocked the underjaw of Captain Page entirely away, and brought several others to the ground. The underjaw is gone to the windpipe, and the tongue hangs down upon the throat. He will never be able to speak or to eat. End quote. And he would obviously Captain Page die later, but that I thought that was a horrible, horrible description. I've read it so many times and said it into my microphone like twice now, so it's not as bothersome. But it really bothered me the first time I read it.
Absolutely. Terrible scene. Palo Alto, which is the namesake of the California city of Palo Alto, the home of Stanford University. There are so many different towns just strewn across the landscape named after these Mexican war battles. It's something I particularly like. And like San Jacinto, we pronounce them in the gringo way. So Palo Alto, it's a small battle. There are thousands of men on either side, but it's just an artillery duel. Only 9 Americans die in Palo Alto. The Americans take out 102 Mexicans. And this is a fair little miniature of what the Mexicans are like. The Mexicans may be well led on occasion.
One more time, say the casualty figures one more time. You cut out there for just a second.
9 Americans to 102 Mexicans.
Yep. Or more.
That's not full casualties, but that's just dead. It's a good picture in miniature of what the Mexican War looks like. Though the Mexicans may be well led, though they did have numerical superiority in almost all of their encounters with the Americans. Their bad equipment and the quality of their troops are the key to their defeat.
At Palo Alto, the Mexicans shot 750 rounds. The Americans shot 3,000 artillery rounds.
That's remarkable. It shows the better quality equipment and discipline.
And provisions.
So, yes, indeed. The Americans were far better provisioned. So the Mexicans retreat from Palo Alto. They're still in Texas territory. They're still on the north side of the Rio Grande. They go down into a dry creek bed at Resaca de Palma. So Taylor gives pursuit. The Mexican General Arista is looking for some kind of cover and looking to utilize the landscape. So this is a rough landscape, awful lot of cactus and such. And there is this minor canyon, this dry creek bed, which he means to use as breastworks to give his men cover. He sees the rough cactus-strewn landscape as additional elements for his defense. He still outnumbers the Americans, but he can't stand up in an artillery duel. And so he retreats down into this dry creek bed, and the Americans come onto the scene. So May 9th, just 2 days after Palo Alto, Taylor pursues Arista. He flanks him in these dry creek beds, and we see a lot of hand-to-hand combat, the Battle of Resaca de Palma.
So Resaca is a big arroyo. It's an ancient, when the ice was melting, it formed this huge arroyo, but much bigger, so they call it a Resaca. So Arista put Abate, I forget the name, but he tied together logs and he made all these things inside, so the Americans weren't able to flank. So Taylor realized the Americans could not go around the chaparral, which is cactus, but also it is this very tangled brush that sometimes is 6 feet tall. Arista put his men inside the chaparral, and sometimes the Mexicans were 6 feet from the Americans as they were slowly making their way through this horrible mess of tangled brush, mesquite trees, and all that, and thorny garbage. And the road was very thin, and so it was taking a while for the artillery and the horses and the, I don't know if they had mules yet, probably mules, and the wagons to approach. So Taylor fanned his man out into the chaparral, and they were slowly making their way. And they get to the Resaca or arroyo or ditch, giant ditch, whatever you want to call it. And Arista had lined his men on inside the arroyo, standing, just only their heads and their guns visible on top of the land. And he had protected his flanks. So the Americans could not attack the flanks. So Taylor remembered something that Napoleon wrote is like, you just attack one spot in the center, you puncture it, and you send all your men through it. And that is what Taylor did. He opened his artillery on one spot. Well, some other were protecting the flanks, but opened his artillery on one spot near the middle. And there was huge breastworks of fallen palma is a palm tree. They cut down all these palm trees and built this huge wall. Sorry, I just tapped my microphone. Built this huge wall of palm trees on the road. And so these men had to go through the chaparral while the cannons were blasting one spot. And they all, at one point, the Americans, charged through this hole. And then once they got through that hole, they fanned out among the Mexicans who were all lined up. And many of the Mexicans on the edges who weren't being attacked at that moment saw this. Some of them were brave and rushed to the middle, but it was such close combat fighting that they couldn't reach the Americans in between their own guys. And so a lot of Mexicans, they gave up and they fled to the Rio Grande.
I see here where I've misinterpreted Billington. So let's see. For a time, Arista's soldiers fought like devils, as an admiring American wrote. I'm in Billington this way.
Catastrophe, Mr. Bagby. You roboted out for all of that. Could you start the quote again?
I'm sorry. Yes, Billington. He said the Americans, let's see. For a time, Arista's soldiers fought like devils, as an admiring American wrote. But when their left flank was turned, resistance suddenly dissolved, and they rushed pell-mell toward the Rio Grande. So that's where I got they had flanked them. My shorthand for describing what I had read. So Resaca, this was a much larger battle. There were only 1,700 Americans at Resaca. The Mexicans under Arista had 4,000. So over twice the number, and yet the Americans drove them from the field. The Americans lost 33 dead. The Mexicans had 154 dead, over 500 casualties total, captured, wounded, and dead. And this
Just
is
wait till
the
we get to
last.
the Battle of Chihuahua, where one American dies in the battle and 500 Mexicans die. Sorry, don't want to spoil it.
Yes, the great Colonel Donovan.
Such a good
not
story.
Sure we're going to get to him today. Oh, but
No, of course not.
Oh, Donovan is so amazing. I love him. So the result of this is very interesting. Back in Washington, the political concern is curious. Thomas Hart Benton, Andrew Jackson's old opponent, the man who had shot Andrew Jackson in the back, he is one of Polk's great men in Congress at this stage. He's a senator from Missouri.
Fremont's
Benton
father-in-law.
That's right. Yes. John C. Fremont's father-in-law. Fremont had eloped with Benton's daughter. which is a very risky move. If you know much about Thomas Hart Benton, he might just hunt you down and kill you for that. But Benton said, "We wanted a small war, just large enough to require a treaty of peace and not large enough to make military reputations dangerous for the presidency."
Mm.
So this is an interesting consideration because the shining knight of the War Department was none other than General Winfield Scott,
Mm.
Old Fuss and Feathers, a notable officer all the way back in the War of 1812.
Yeah,
Winfield Scott had.
if you read Grant's memoirs, his tone when he talks about General Scott can only be described as worshipful. Grant talks at length about how he viewed Scott as being the embodiment of the American soldier and a god of war. It's amazing how he was held in such incredible esteem by his contemporaries.
Winfield Scott is awesome and deserves plenty of attention. He's an amazing leader, and he has such a long term of service, going from the War of 1812 to the principal commander at the beginning of the Civil War.
Mm-hmm.
He's such a remarkable man. But he is also an opponent of the Democrats. He's a Whig. Later on, he does run for president unsuccessfully. But Polk is eager to promote Zachary Taylor because Taylor has Democratic associations anyway. Ironically, Zachary Taylor does become president later, but runs as a Whig.
Mhm.
So both of these generals end up associating with the Whigs, the opponents of the Democrats. Back in Washington, yes, go ahead, Riley.
So there was a law passed under Polk that he was allowed to appoint new and more generals. I guess the law before only allowed one general, or I don't remember what I read, but the Congress passed a law saying Polk can appoint more than one general. So he goes on appointing many, many generals throughout the war. And this kind of frustrates Scott a little bit. And so I think you're about to go into this, but Scott was sacked, although he would come back and redeem himself later. But so there's a new law that says Polk, the president, can appoint more than one general. And he does that, and he appoints Democrats as generals and officers. Well, Donovan was a Whig, and a few others are Whigs, but yeah. So that kind of created tension in the federal government with the Whigs when Polk was given that new authority.
Certainly. But as far as grand strategy is concerned, the political establishment decides to start three armies for the New Mexican War. They start organizing an army of the West, which they mean to send to California. They have an army of the center that they are aiming at Chihuahua in the north center of Mexico, and they begin organizing an army of occupation, which they intend for the center of Mexico. Really, the end game of the strategy to take Mexico City proper, which we will see develop later on. We aren't getting to that today, but that's the end stage of the war. So after Resaca de Palma, American journalists are getting a hold of the stories developing down in the Rio Grande Valley, and Zachary Taylor is praised to the skies. He is the new George Washington. He is the man of the power. There is nothing he cannot do. He has defeated a Mexican army twice his size, twice over, and expelled them from Texas territory. He is called Old Rough and Ready, and he is a most unlikely public character. He is a rather rough sort of fellow, kind of unkept in his appearance, though he is a general of the army, on an independent command and all the rest. He is not at all a spit and polish sort of guy. So he's kind of an unlikely superhero for the hour. But Polk promotes him after Resaca to Major General. So he gets a new promotion and starts planning his operations in the north of Mexico. So meanwhile, out west in the great Western Army outpost, Fort Leavenworth in the territory of Kansas, just close by to Kansas City, General Stephen Kearny is organizing the Army of the West with his focus on California ultimately, but by way of New Mexico.
I am so sorry, Bagby. I also, for years, have read Kearney. Apparently, it's pronounced Carney for some reason.
Carney. Okay.
Yeah,
I'm glad.
I did not know
I'm
that.
happy to hear it. I constantly read books and I don't know how people pronounce these things. So I'm always happy to be corrected on the subject.
2 of the books I read from my series said in parentheses pronounced Carney. And I was like, oh, well, thank you for saying that. Because I'm about to speak into a microphone. I want to say it right. But yeah, it's Carney apparently.
Carney. That's a wonderful thing about American English. There's so many proper pronunciations for all kinds of things. I was talking to a Frenchman about a name in my family, which happens to be French. And he was telling me, oh, no, monsieur, you're pronouncing it the wrong way. And I said, no, that's how we all say it. It's okay. It's American. But he was insistent because the French are allowed to be rude. And I like that so much. On occasion, I wish I... Well, anyway, Kearny, he leaves Leavenworth for New Mexico. And his opposing number is none other than Manuel Armijo, who we have encountered previously. Armijo was the man who had taken in the poor bedraggled Texans on the ill-fated expedition to Santa Fe during the Texas Republic. So he imprisoned them all and sent them all south. But Armijo is still there in Santa Fe, and he is organizing the only major Mexican asset in the theater, which is New Mexico. That's the only place where the Mexicans have men and resources.
Well, men.
So Armijo begins
not
distributing
resources.
Well, they do have a spirited populace. You know, they have
Yes.
human resources. They have
Yes.
wealth. There are lots of merchants there. It really is a prize in the region. It's the one place the Mexicans have kept and developed from the Spanish Dominion. So Armijo
I would
is
push back a little
distributing...
bit on that.
Oh, please do.
The Spanish had given up on New Mexico before the revolution, the Mexican Revolution. After the Mexican Revolution, they, not as bad as California, but they pretty much ignored New Mexico until 1837. There was a rebellion where they decapitated the governor and deposed his government, and they installed a whole bunch of miscreants into the government. And then Armijo was sent back up to take it back over. This was 1837. So he was governor in 1832 during the Santa Fe expedition from Texas. He had was no longer, you don't win a governorship in New Mexico. You're appointed a governorship. Well, he was no longer governor, but he was sent back up from Mexico City to go take over from these rebel, barbarians who cut off the governor's head because of a tax. Well, they were all poor in New Mexico. And so Armijo was there, and he, exactly what you're saying, he rallied a defense, and then I'm sure you're going to get into it with this whole back and forth. But New Mexico had always been the northernmost outpost of the entire Spanish Empire completely. And the road from DF or District Federal or Mexico City to Santa Fe was, as we will hear with all of the Americans going down the Camino Real, it was extremely rough and hot and waterless and filled with our friends the Apaches and other Indios. And so it was very dangerous. The New Mexicans were largely ignored by Mexico City, but not as ignored as California. But still, it was ripe for conquest, essentially. And if Armijo had been an honorable man, maybe Kearny and the Army of the West would have had a tougher time. But I'll give it back to you.
Indeed. Armijo has a very independent kind of administration, has a serious challenge with the impending arrival of Kearny and the Army of the West. Kearny is coming down with interesting people. He's coming down with Colonel Sterling Price of Missouri. He's coming down with Philip St. George Cook of Virginia, both of which are Civil War figures, both of which are in the Confederate Army at the beginning of the Civil War. Sterling Price lives to the end. Poor Philip St. George Cook, he shoots himself after the Battle of Manassas. He feels like he's been disgraced, passed over, that he's lost his opportunity. He's a very odd example of a Civil War suicide. Virginia Confederate general later on and meets his very sad fate. But he was a hero of the Mexican War. So he's coming down with Kearny on the road, on the Santa Fe Trail, in fact. So Kearny organizes his men at Bent's Old Fort in southeast Colorado on the Santa Fe Trail, and they start making their way over the Raton Pass up in northern New Mexico. It's on the I-25 corridor now. Now the Interstate 25 goes over the Raton Pass in that region. So Armijo is distributing all sorts of literature and making speeches saying, we will resist to the last. We will fight to the last here. You'll never take us alive, and so on. Kearny sends in liberty and property for all that.
Hold on, you're cutting out there, Bagby. Sorry, you're roboting again. But I think I know what you're getting at. President Polk actually sent Cook and a trader named, not a trader, but a trade, somebody who trades on the Santa Fe Trail, a trader named James McGuffin and Cook to Armijo to bribe him and tell him, please allow America to get there safely, or Americans to get there safely through the Pecos Valley and then the Apache Canyon up to Santa Fe. And Armijo says no at first, although I think he took their bribes, although that's not recorded. But actually, it's Colonel Donovan, who was a lawyer in Missouri. He defended, he was a prominent lawyer, and he defended a certain religious sect there for a while, and he actually refused to assassinate a certain religious sect's leader which, you know, he didn't actually get in trouble for that, but
That would be a violation of attorney-client privilege, yes.
yes. He was, at the time, he was commander of the Missouri militia, brigadier general of the Missouri militia. And so somebody below a subordinate told him, you should assassinate this particular guy of this weird sect. And he said, no, I'm not going to. So he won the admiration of those people. Anyways, and also those people are they have the only religious battalion in American history. And they're also on the march with, Kearney. Kearney. They're all going out west in their own battalion, the only religious battalion, and the battalion that has the longest march in military history. But anyways, so they get
And proving once again that every good story needs a MacGuffin.
yes, and James MacGuffin is the man who was sent to Armijo to bribe him, to tell him, please let the Americans come in. And well, we don't know exactly what he thinks, but we know the outcome of what happens after this. But the Army of the West came through, like you were saying, and the entire time from Bent's Ford on the Arkansas River, once they crossed over the international boundary, all they're hearing about is this 4,000-man army that's protecting Apache Canyon, and they are gonna whip you and, you know, whatever. But yeah,
Indeed, and that meeting between Magoffin, Cook, and Armijo is a key event here. No one knows exactly what was proposed there. We know that Carney is delivering his message of liberal forgiveness, the protection of private property, um, all that sort of thing. But we don't know really what Magoffin was doing. And so Cook and Magoffin go to Santa Fe under a flag of truce. They meet secretly with Armijo. We don't know exactly what is said, but then Armijo behaves so strangely afterwards. We imagine that he is part of a larger plot. So Magoffin has a lot of business dealings in Santa Fe. He has a lot of valuable connections there. It is quite possible that merchant interests are prevailing in the fate of Santa Fe, that the merchants really value their American trade network, the Santa Fe Trail, where they are conducting a great deal of business overland with the Americans, and they decide that's the way of the future. They actually have far more meaningful connections with the Americans than they do with Mexico City. And they are going to be much better off under a better administration, a much wealthier trade network with the United States than they will be with Mexico. And this may be some of the reasoning behind Armijo's actions subsequent. What's most remarkable about this is that Armijo does not, he doesn't unite his destiny with New Mexico afterwards. He retreats to Mexico, where he is certainly discredited. So there are several things about this that don't ultimately make sense.
put on
There are
trial for
some reasons
cowardice.
yes, cowardice, loss of nerve, which was the immediate accusation. So Armijo assembles 3,000 New Mexicans to defend Apache Canyon on August 16th. This is only a few days after his meeting with Cook and Magoffin. He quarrels with his commanders as the Americans approach, and then disbands his volunteers, tells them to stack arms and go home. And so Kearney conquers New Mexico without shedding a drop of blood. He walks right into Santa Fe. He announces what he had previously, that he is extending property securities and a Republican form of government to all who have peaceably accommodated the American conquest. According to one of the Americans that made the march, he said, "Had Armijo's heart been as stout as the walls of rock which nature gave him to aid in defense of his country, we might have sought in vain to force the passage." So he had a very strong spot in a natural feature of the land in Apache Canyon, just south of Santa Fe. The route that the Americans were coming, it's actually the route of the major highway through the area today. It's right near Glorieta Pass, actually, isn't it?
It is. It's actually the rebels and the Coloradan volunteers, along with some Union regulars, fought the Confederates in Apache Pass, surprised them and beat them back, and then the rebels mustered up and then marched to Glorieta Pass and fought the major battle there. But meanwhile, the Union went to Apache Pass and burned the 100 wagons of the rebels, which ended the Civil War in New Mexico. But it is a future historian, I don't know the author's name, said that if the New Mexicans had held the canyon, it would have been a second Thermopylae, as in, 300, etc. They could have easily, and they were again cutting down trees, blocking the road, digging ditches, digging redoubts. They had artillery, and if they had held Apache Pass, somebody, I think it's Lieutenant Emery would write what he saw the fortifications. Oh no, never mind. That's a bad one. Okay. Lieutenant Emery wrote once he saw the fortifications at Apache Pass that they looked very stupid. But there was another person that wrote that it looked really, if they would have held it, it would have been a headache. I think it was actually Carney himself, or maybe Donovan, said if they'd have held it, it would have been a headache, and a lot of Americans would have died. But Armijo pointed his canyons at his regular Mexican army lieutenants and said, "If you don't leave, I'm going to fire upon you." And at that point, everyone fled the canyon. It was actually a race to get out. Everyone went home. Everyone was like, "All right, I guess I'm done. I ain't defending New Mexico if our governor isn't asking us to." Which, oddly enough, Armijo went to his legislature and then his military commanders and asked, "Should I defend this?" And everyone said, "This is an inappropriate question. We're here to die. What are you doing? Die or win?" So Armijo really let New Mexico down, and I'm sure we'll cover it later, but New Mexicans didn't forget it, hence the Taos Revolt of 1847 in January.
Indeed, it's really an inexplicable, unforced error on the part of Armijo. And we don't have a good explanation for his actions here. Because if he had been richly bribed, why would he have gone back to Mexico to face the music there? Because he was totally discredited. We don't have a good explanation for his actions. But the American conquest is completely remarkable. It's total victory without any loss. Just the long walk to get there. So we've gotten to a very interesting juncture now. We've gone for an hour about the opening moves of the Mexican War. We have a tremendous amount of very entertaining material to get to in future episodes here. But this is a good stopping place for us. Carney has marched his way bloodlessly into New Mexico. Complete victory. Taylor has expelled the Mexicans from southern Texas over the Rio Grande, and the fun is only beginning. So make sure you come back next week for exciting sequels.
Indeed, like Rienzi Act 1, we are ending on a note of easy triumph. Let us hope future acts do not track with that particular opera. All right, beginning with the super chats then. Adrian Shepard, 378, sends $2 saying, "Thanks. for introducing me to the Southwest podcast. Well, you're very welcome, although I will note that it's the American Southwest podcast. Isn't that right, Mr. Riley?
That is correct. The American Southwest.
Following on with a further $5, Adrian Shepard 378 says, what happened to the secularized missions after the Americans took over? Did they remain abandoned, or did the Catholic clergy regain their properties? Either of you gentlemen know what
Is this in
became of them?
California?
Yes, I assume that's what he's referring to, yeah.
If he's talking about California, the Americans, which we'll talk about much later in 1847, they rebuilt them, actually. The Americans, the Mormon battalion, the regulars under Kearny, they rebuilt these missions because they were in destitute. I don't think they, well, you know what? No, I've been to San Juan Capistrano. It's still a Catholic mission. I'm sure they were handed back over to the Catholics. Actually, now that I think about it.
Bolero.
At some point,
Go ahead, Mr. Bagby. Add your 2 cents.
yes, at some point they certainly were handed back over to become Catholic chapels and the like. Not all of them were rebuilt, to my knowledge. Some of them fell into ruin, and I've seen photographs of the ruins in modern times. It's possible in more recent times they've been restored and turned into places of worship again. But
So
there's certainly an intervening time.
Ones in California were destroyed by earthquakes, actually. So they were not rebuilt by the Catholics after the Mexican-American War and then after the earthquake. And I can't remember what missions I'm thinking of in California, but in New Mexico, obviously the Pecos mission was never rebuilt. It's just ruins of Pecos National Monument. But Taos will have cannons fired into it. The Taos mission or cathedral there will have cannons fired into it, and it's still there today. It'll be rebuilt.
I may be hallucinating this, but I want to say that Thomas Aquinas College was built on top of an old Spanish mission.
I wouldn't doubt it.
Anyway,
that would be very appropriate.
Indeed. Bolero 393 sends $5 saying, we should toast James Polk every time we take a drink of tap water in the Southwest and don't suffer the throes of Montezuma's revenge.
Amen.
Indeed. Raise a glass of frosty tap water to James K. Polk. Bolero 393 again for $10 asks a counterfactual question. How would the course of the war have differed if Polk had supported Taylor moving south instead of shifting those troops to Winfield Scott in the Veracruz operation?
We're jumping ahead a little bit. I think enough volunteers were ready that I'm not sure it would have been a problem. And Taylor so thoroughly conquered Monterey and then Saltillo after, I guess it's the Battle of Buena Vista, I think. But he so conquered Santa Fe's army that the southern invasion to Veracruz over to Mexico City was it was a done deal. Kind of like even the northern territories, once Donovan took Chihuahua City, Ciudad Chihuahua, the Mexicans fled into the mountains, in large numbers, never to be seen again. Well, until they came home afterwards, but never to be seen again in the army. They certainly weren't there for the protection of Mexico City or the coast at San Luis Potosi or Veracruz. I think that I don't think the Mexicans were ready for this war. And I'm not sure they could have. The only battle they won was in Southern California outside of San Diego. And by one, I mean, they still gave up the battlefield, and it was a very, very small encounter. That was the only battle they won the entire war. I'm not sure anything the Mexicans could have done except better planning. And yeah, I guess that's it. That could have even remotely saved them from anything. Because they did have good generals and military men, but they're civilian governors who are often also military. They just we're not up to the task of what is about to unfold as we continue the series. You have to wait.
More to come. And then finally, and most graciously, Dame Dawn Browning sends us 20 upside down dollars, accompanied with a animated picture of what appears to be a samurai fox clutching a trophy. Thank you, Miss Browning. It is ever a delight to have you in the audience. All right, gentlemen, that concludes the Super Chats. Mr. Wayne Riley, what do you have to announce to us this week?
The American Southwest podcast and website, and
I've heard of that.
I'm doing a series right now over the Mexican-American War. I just released one over the conquest of, California, I think. I don't know. I got, I have the paid subscriber Substack, and then I have the rest of the plebs, the plebs. But so subscribe and hear all about the Mexican-American War. It should be 14 episodes, all about 2 to 3 hours long. I'm not quite, Dan Carlin or Daryl Cooper, but hey, listen up.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And Mr. Bagby, what do you have to promote, shill, or otherwise inform the chat of this week?
I've been working on new books. I just submitted a biography of John Taylor of Caroline, one of the old Jeffersonian Republicans, one of the agrarians. That's coming into print here soon. When it comes into print, you will find it on my Twitter handle, which is @TallmenBooks on X. Eventually, it'll make it onto my website. My website's tallmenbooks.com.
Tallmanbooks.com. Yes, the Old Glory Club has particular reason to treasure the Southern agrarians to its bosom. All right.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. As always, it has been a delight speaking to you. And thank you, chat, for coming out. Come back next week for more travails of Mexican woes and American triumphs. See you all then.